Hello, I am Anna. I am a social worker and a content creator. This is the second video in our helping process series where we will talk about what the process looks like as a social worker working with a client in 6 steps. The first video covered both engagement and assessment, so if you've missed that one, go start there and then come here. In this video, we will cover planning and intervention. And then part 3 will be evaluation and termination. Overall, the social work helping process is 6, sometimes 7 steps that are a general framework for every social worker when they are working with a client. Now, there are different caveats and different details that may change or look a little bit different depending on which area of the field you work in and what your scope of practice is, whether you're working with individuals, groups, families, communities, if you're working in macro. But this is the bare bones. Just like with last video, I think it is very important to begin with the core values and principles of the profession of social work because obviously we will be upholding them no matter what we are doing, which part of the helping process we are in. And so just as a reminder, social workers' primary goal is to help people in need and address social problems. Social workers challenge social injustice. Social workers respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person. Social workers recognize the central importance of human relationships. Social workers behave in a trustworthy manner. And social workers practice within their area of competence and develop and enhance their professional expertise. So as we begin today's video, we're assuming that you have already engaged with the client and you have already completed an assessment. Moving into step number 3, that is the planning step. And it is one that is so commonly not given enough energy, while it is so crucial and important no matter what kind of work you're doing as a social worker. So after you've engaged the client, after you've assessed their needs, it is crucial to plan interventions before you take any action. Not only do you not go into an intervention unprepared, but it is also important to clearly communicate the treatment plan to the client to the level that is beneficial so that they know what we're getting into too. They know the process. In short, what is planning? It is when the social worker and the client collaborate to finalize what the goals of intervention are and how they will be reached. This is also when you determine are the types of interventions that are within your competence and within your expertise right for the client that's in front of you. So what does planning include? What are the goals of intervention? This will vary depending on the theoretical perspective that you're following, but it is often quite beneficial to use the client's wording when discussing goals. This ensures that the treatment remains client focused and it remains not, if I were the client, this is what I think should be fixed in their life, but it really is the client is coming to you and so you are addressing what they would like to be addressed. Client goals are not the ones that social workers determine clients need to set because the social worker identifies some flaw in them. The goals are addressing the presenting problem. So what are the goals of intervention? How will we achieve these goals? Also known as what research-based intervention or treatment will be right for this client. And when we discuss intervention, we'll discuss some of the different types of interventions that can be used, that are commonly used, but there is such vast variation in what the actual intervention will be, which I'm sure you can assume it's going to be different depending on which area of the field you're working with, which population you're working with, what your role in the agency is, etc. What are the goals? How will we achieve the goals? Then we make an action plan. Every client is different. They come in from a different place and you learned their unique place of life during the assessment phase. So now you can use the information you have gathered to create a personalized plan of action that addresses the presenting problem. The client should be involved to the extent that is beneficial in creating an action plan as well. As a social worker, it is always our job to promote empowerment, promote self-determination, and promote independence. Allowing clients to take part in their treatment to the extent that is beneficial is really important in being a social worker. It can be helpful to think of it more as a partnership collaboration than I am the expert and you need to listen to me because you're the client. Of course, you know how to do this process. You know how social processes work. You know more about the intervention than they do. So you can provide a framework of what that's going to look like, but ultimately the client is the one who is actually putting in the work to achieve their goals. You can't put in the work to achieve their goals for them. It doesn't matter what you want for the client. It matters what the client wants for themselves. So some tips to plan well. Ask coworkers and supervisors in the specific agency and area of the field that you are in what treatment planning looks like for them, what the process of that is, how you document it, and then also, and we'll get a little bit into this further in the helping process, but what the structure for reviewing treatment plans looks like. Seeing others in action treatment planning may help this step feel more attainable, actionable for you. And remember that planning will vary so greatly depending on the area of the field that you are in. If you are working in therapy, then this step will include determining which therapy modality the client will benefit from. If you are working in case management, then the planning step may include deciding which resource agency you're going to refer the client to. Regardless, the client should be informed what the plan is and why the plan is that. Going to our handy dandy code of ethics. 1.02, social workers respect and promote the rights of clients to self-determination and assist clients in their efforts to identify and clarify their goals. Social workers may limit clients' rights to self-determination when, in the social worker's professional judgment, judgment, client's actions or potential actions pose a serious, foreseeable, and imminent risk to themselves or others. So in this stage, focusing more on the first part of that, about how it is our job to respect and promote the rights of clients to self-determination. Including them in the planning process is part of this. They've given their informed consent because you've talked about expectations of treatment, roles, boundaries, etc. But now you're looking at getting into the nitty-gritty of it, of how are we going to intervene? What is this going to look like? What is this going to include? What are the goals that we are achieving? What are the objectives that we're striving for? Clients get to be part of that. 1.05, social workers should demonstrate awareness and cultural humility by engaging in critical self-reflection, understanding their own bias, and engaging in self-correction, recognizing clients as experts of their own culture, committing to lifelong learning, and holding institutions accountable for advancing cultural humility. Why I bring this part of the Code of Ethics into the planning step specifically is to hone in on the fact that treatment goals are set by the client. The client is the expert on their own life, on their own experience, on what they want, on how they view the world, on how they interact with the world, on how the world interacts with them. So it is up to them to determine what success looks like for them. Cultural humility as a social worker looks like not taking my culture and setting goals based on it for someone outside of my culture. Just because someone is different than me does not mean that they are wrong. And that is something that social workers need to consciously think of, or else it'll come out in an implicit bias. Again, remember that just because you are used to the process of working with a social worker and how that looks like doesn't mean that the client is used to this process or quite comfortable with it yet. Clear communication is so crucial through the planning stage, especially without being condescending. You are going to know more than the client, which is why it's on you to clearly communicate what the plan is and what the plan can be so that they can clearly understand what the plan is and what intervention will look like. I made up some examples for this. Planning is not limited to these examples that I came up with, and some of them are outside of what I'm used to in practice. So if you have other examples that are in your own scope of practice and you'd like to comment them, I would love that because I'm sure other people would love to see that too. But for example, say that you are a micro social worker working in a therapy setting. Your planning stage could determine that you are going to use trauma systems therapy, just as an example, because trauma systems therapy has been shown to reduce trauma-related symptoms in both males and females from age 6 to age 19, blah, blah, blah. Here's our treatment plan for that. So being the social worker and having learned about different interventions, you're the one who knows like, okay, trauma systems therapy, that's what I'm trained in, that's what I'm certified in, supervised under. The client most likely is not going to know what trauma systems therapy is. So that's why in the planning process, you discuss the mode of intervention that you're going to use, why it's beneficial, why it might be applicable to the client. The client communicates their goals to you, so then you can communicate how this modality has been shown to help other people that maybe have the same goals or the similar presenting problems. I hope that helps it make sense. Or a meso example. This is a program that has been utilized in these locations and has been shown to increase attendance rates in high schoolers by X% over X months, shown in this published research paper. So if you're coming in to work on raising attendance rates in a high school, you're not going to just make something up and hope it works. The planning stage is more seeing, okay, what has worked? Like what may work for this high school? Here are my exact goals, objectives, and the plan of how I'm going to get there. Macro level. This legislation preventing employers from requiring a permanent address prior to employment was implemented in X state X years ago. Compared to then, previously unhoused residents have reported an X% increase in financial security. I made that up. But the planning stage for macro can include research like that. This thing seemed to show improvement in this state. How can we take what worked for them and start implementing it into ours because we want to address this social problem in ours? Lots of times when you're in school for social work, you will be practicing this kind of planning, whether it's in your individuals class, whether it's in your groups class, whether it's in your community class, whether it's in your policy class. It can seem kind of arbitrary when you're doing it for school or when you're writing a paper, but it is a skill and a step that is included in the social work profession when you become a professional social worker. Okay, so now you have engaged, you have assessed, you have planned. It is finally time to intervene. What is intervention? It is actively working to meet the goals and objectives set by the client. This is also where each individual social worker's process will vary so much depending on what you're doing, which population you're working with, which agency you're with, etc. Intervention may be long-term or it may be short-term, but no matter what, intervention is designed to address the presenting problem that you assessed for. What intervention includes is actually starting to do the work, whether it's in therapy sessions, whether it's starting a program, whether it's referring a client to a resource they need. Code of Ethics 1.04. Social workers should provide services and represent themselves as competent only within the boundaries of their education, training, license, certification, consultation received, supervised experience, and other relevant professional experience. Social workers should provide services in substantive areas or use intervention techniques or approaches that are new to them only after engaging in appropriate study, training, consultation, and supervision from people who are competent in those interventions or techniques. I bring this up at this point to say that if a client needs an intervention or a treatment that you are not trained in and are not competent in, don't have a supervisor who's supervising you under, if you're not independently licensed, you need to refer the client to someone who can help them in the ways they need. So when you're doing interventions, it's in the interventions that you know how to do, because since the field is so broad, I cannot walk into a therapy office and start conducting EMDR therapy because I have never been trained in that. I have not been supervised under that. I have not been certified with that. And if that is what someone is looking for, I can't provide them that, so I refer them to someone who can. At this point, when you're actually intervening, you would have already determined what kind of intervention you're using, but for the sake of clarity of what the intervention step will actually look like, here are some examples of intervention modalities. Most of them are micro because that is what I'm most familiar with. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, crisis intervention model, narrative therapy, task-centered practice, solution-focused therapy, problem-solving model, behavior therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, that's the EMDR, exposure therapy, family therapy, group interventions, holistic approach, parent training, play therapy, psychotherapy, psychoeducation, psychosocial intervention, school-based intervention, social emotional therapy, psychopharmacology, care management, strengths-based approach, community organization. With intervention, I know I've already said it, I'm just gonna like hammer in the nail a little bit deeper. You work within your competency or you get trained to do what you want to know how to do. Another example, I am not going to give anyone any kind of exposure therapy because I have not been trained in how to do that well, and it could be harmful to a client. We don't just throw wet noodles at the wall and see what sticks. Gotta stick within your competency. And remember through intervention that success is relative and progress is progress. There is not one way to be successful, and a client is not gonna go from 0 to 100 in 24 hours. Success is relative and any progress is progress. Some tips to do intervention well when you're at this step is to ensure that the intervention is always focused on the treatment goals that have been set. If someone's presenting problem is, I feel like I keep bringing this up as an example, but financial insecurity, and they are needing resources and support and becoming more financially secure, or maybe gaining employment if they're unemployed, your intervention is not going to be addressing like maladaptive thoughts if that's not what they want. I'm looking for help with tangible resources and you're telling me, just be happy. I over-exaggerate to show the example, but your intervention needs to be focused on the treatment plan that has been set to achieve the treatment goals that have been set. Ensure that the client always is understanding the process that they're going through. Remember that informed consent can be revoked by the client at any time. That is their right. Be a lifelong learner and understand that as a social worker, you will always have room to grow. And that's valid for no matter how many years post-grad you are, there's always room to grow. So even though you got certified in an intervention, maybe in a certain type of therapy, you can continue learning and continue building on your skills so that your interventions can be the best that you can make them be for the clients that you are serving. So with that, you can participate in continuing education units that are beneficial to you. Once you get licensed, it'll likely be a requirement, though the amount might vary, that you do need to participate in continuing education units. So you can choose classes and workshops and conferences that will really be beneficial to you so that you can be the best at the interventions that you use, which ultimately then boils down to clients getting better social work services. So circling back to the core values and the principles of the social work profession that we mentioned at the beginning, some reflection questions for you after you just learned so much about planning and about intervention. What does it look like to help people in need and address social problems in planning and in intervention? How can social injustice be challenged through planning and intervention? How can you respect the dignity and inherent worth of the person through planning and through intervention? How can you centralize the importance of human relationships through planning and intervention? How can you be trustworthy through planning and through intervention? And how can you ensure that you are practicing within your area of competence through planning and through intervention? After intervention, your social work helping process is not done, so stay tuned for the third video in this series where we will talk about evaluation and termination of services. Arguably some of the very most important steps. Definitely not two that you can skip out on. Subscribe before you go, and I'll see you next time.